Hello, and pleased to meet you. If you're new here, if you're not, welcome back, faithful Robketeers, to Sentimental Elephants, a musical journey where we're taking a trip through the alphabet, going through it letter by letter, and picking an artist for each letter, and we will talk about here my personal connection with the artist, my history with them, a little bit of my life story in connection with their work. We have reached the letter P. I'm trying to get through a couple tonight, and I keep scratching my face. So it's we're at the letter P, and I was startled to realize this one went through a lot of changes. There was a number of different people starting with a P, that we could have gone, and it changed around a few times. And then when I was going through, but I've settled on one and realized it had to be this one particular artist. And compiling the list, I was like looking at it, and I was thinking, I was shocked to see how many of my favorite artists start with P. Most of them start with gas. Juvenile, crude humor, folks. That's what we bring to you. Dignity, always dignity. Except on days ending in Y. So, this was almost about Procol Harum. It also could have been about Pink Floyd, Prince. Very nearly was about Porcupine Tree. And connecting to Porcupine Tree is also another great British modern progressive rock band, Pineapple Thief. I was wearing a Pineapple Thief t-shirt in my previous in my previous video. I changed shirts in between videos. You'll see why soon. So it's Porcupine Tree, Pineapple Thief, Pavement, Fish, starts with a P, Iggy Pop, who I've seen this past summer, sort of, it was more like autumn, but bucket list show, incredible, great performer. I'm going to skim through these because there's a lot of them. Joel Plaskett, Psychedelic Furs, Portishead, Parliament, and with it, I guess we could say P-Funk, Placebo, John Prine, Michael Penn, Public Enemy, Pulp, Primal Scream, Oscar Peterson, The Pretenders, Robert Pollard, we talked about in a fair bit of detail in the Guided by Voices video. There's a lot of content in that one, but it would fall under P. Placebo. Yes, The Police. Yeah. Rock and Roll Hall of Famers, Robert Plant, who I also saw this past summer in an absolutely deadly freaking show. Him and Alison Krauss, incredible. Pop Will Eat Itself. The Posies, who I've seen live and have chatted with. Prefab Sprout. Primus, seen them live. The Pixies. Elvis Presley, got through this whole list, and here we're hitting the king of rock and roll. I mean, it's like we're this far in, but I guess maybe just like I tend to think of him more of as Elvis. I forget. Oh yeah, Elvis Presley would be under P. Alan Parsons Project, which I believe is some sort of hovercraft. Jean-Luc Ponty, the great French jazz violinist. He also worked with Frank Zappa. The country rock legend, Graham Parsons. You could say kind of founder of country rock, founder of alternative country. But I had to pick one artist. Had to pick with a P. And when it came down to it, it had to be one. That's why I changed shirts. It's by the fact that there's fluff on this. Came out of the dryer that way. Sorry, I don't know what happened. My man, Tom Petty. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Wow. What can we say about him? There's a lot to say. This could go fairly long. But I want to at least... I don't want to go super in-depth on his history. You can read up on that. Wikipedia. There's a great documentary, which I'll be talking about later. But I'll just kind of skim over the highlights of his history. He was born Thomas Earl Petty, born in 1950, I believe it was. Yeah, born in 1950 in Gainesville, Florida. He knew Don Felder, who would later be of the Eagles. Don Felder claimed that he taught him, was one of his guitar teachers. Tom Petty said that he taught him piano. I was like, okay, But he also Tom Petty's first. Well, I believe the first band was called the Epics, but later went to the name of Mudcrutch. One of the members was one Tom Ledden, who would later play with Leonard Ronstadt. He would be in the band Silver. He was the brother of Bernie Ledden, who was another guitar player in the Eagles, also from, I believe, Gainesville, Florida, but definitely a Florida. So, a couple of Eagles tie-ins. Mentioned the Eagles. Go back to my E is for the Eagles video. That was one that I did. So, as I said, he formed a band called Mudcrutch. He would later say it was the worst imaginable name ever. Paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it. They wound up getting signed by Denny Cordell, the legendary producer who worked with Procol Harum, start with P. He produced Whiter Shade of Pale. He did a lot of great work with Leon Russell, I believe. Definitely Joe Cocker. But he had formed his own label called Shelter Records. And he signed them. But didn't really work out for Mudcrutch on Shelter. They got one single, it flopped, and the band broke up. And the record label kept on Tom Petty as a solo artist initially, but Ben Montench, the keyboard player for Mudcrutch, kind of wanted to see what he could do. He didn't want to go back home. He wanted to stay in the music business, and he brought in Mike Campbell, who's a guitar player from Mudcrutch, and linked up with a rhythm section of two other Florida natives who were at the time living in LA, trying to make their own mark, which was Ron Blair on bass, Stan Lynch on drums, and Tom Petty kind of wound up staying for a session when they were doing rehearsals and thought, idea, and thought, hey, this is a great band. So he said, hey, guess what? You guys can be my band. I've got a record deal. And that became Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. By the way, I'm wearing my Tom Petty. I'm wearing a jaunty hat to embody the spirit of Tom Petty. I'll take it off now. It's not really a Tom Petty type hat, but I just thought I'd wear it for the video. So that became Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. They put out their first couple of albums, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and You're Gonna Get It. And they didn't really take off in North America, but they got a lot of attention in Europe and Britain. They kind of fit in. They had a very stripped back sound that was sort of starting to fit in with the post-punk, and I don't really think of them as a punk band, but they kind of fit in with what they were doing there, sort of a little bit more of the new wave style. And they were kind of, had some credibility there. I remember in part of the documentary, Dave Stewart, later at the Eurythmics, sort of said they were kind of the one American band that you could like in Britain at the time. Heartbreakers, real. It was tough. It was melodic, but it was tough and melodic at the same time. It wasn't like long, stretched out solos. They were a very, very tight band, backed by Petty's songwriting, which is amazing. So they had some credit. The first two albums, kind of sort of started to pave their way. They're really good albums, but it's the third album that was the breakout, which was Damn the Torpedoes. That's had the sort of first super big singles like Refugee and Don't Do Me Like That. Next album, Hard Promises, kind of continued that work with The Waiting, which is an awesome song. He managed to put these albums out while dealing with a couple of different lawsuits with his record company. There's a lot of static that he was having to deal with there, but managed to come out with great musical work, despite the circumstances. Ongoing success through the 80s. As I say, I'm kind of skimming over. It's a fairly well-known history. You can look it up. In 1989, he put out his first solo album without the Heartbreakers, which was Full Moon Favor. That's the one that had Free Falling on it, which many people might consider his signature song. Although there's a lot of songs that could, maybe could be claimed to be that, American Girl or Refugee or, but, Free Falling is blew the doors open. That was a huge, huge song. Around the same time, he was also part of the Traveling Wilburys, which is a super group consisting of Tom Petty, Roy Orbison, we mentioned in the last video, George Harrison, Bob Dylan, and Jeff Lynne from Electric Light Orchestra. Jeff Lynne would go on to produce Full Moon Fever. And he continues his success in the 90s, in spite of, there were some lineup changes. I won't go too much into detail. You can look them up. But Wildflowers was another great album, which kept going on the success. Yes, I had one other thing that was mentioned with regards to the movie She's the One. I didn't want to tell that story because I find that kind of a fun story. Okay, so Ed Burns is a filmmaker, independent filmmaker. He had done a movie called The Brothers McMullen, and he was working on his next movie, which was called She's the One. Now, I'm not sure how he came into contact with Tom Petty. It might have been through Benmont Tench, Heartbreakers keyboard player, who seems to know everybody. But he was talking with him. This is the story as I remember it. Some of the details might be a get a little smudged, but this is how I like to tell the story. So he's talking with Tom Petty, and is telling him, oh, yeah, I'm working on this movie, and it's about this and this. And Tom Petty says, oh, yeah, great, cool. Tell you what, I'll make some music for that. Ed Burns is, wow, cool, great. Because the Brothers McMullen had a song on it from the wonderful Sarah McLachlan, a song called I Will Remember You. And it was, I think got a little bit of attention to his movie. So, that might not have been there before. So, hey, Tom Petty. Wow, Tom Petty making music for Tom Petty's making music for my movie out of nowhere. That was great. So it's like, oh yeah. So he sent, I'm not sure, he sent some material. It might have been the script or kind of like an early copy of the movie or whatever. Or just, sends it on to Tom Petty and waits. And he waits. Doesn't hear back from Tom Petty. And then he I think he either calls him up or bumps into Tom Petty and says, so, Tom, about my movie. And Petty's like, what movie? Oh, jeez. The movie that you were going to do some music for? I told you. It's like, oh, yeah, that. Yeah. It's done. It's like, great. It's written. Cool. When are you going to record? No. It's done. It's like, it's recorded, it's mixed, it's ready to go. It's done. It's like, and Ed Burns like, the song's done, and Tom Petty's like, song? I did a whole soundtrack album to that. I was like, so out of nowhere, this album, this movie, which has Jennifer Aniston and Cameron Diaz, it's a good movie. I've got it. But now all of a sudden it's got this whole soundtrack album full of these great Tom Petty songs. So it's like, yeah, it also, I believe that's the one that has Angel Dream on it, which is one of my absolute favorite Tom Petty songs, and it makes me think of my last girlfriend. I always associated with her. It's a very beautiful song. And so after that, he also played the role of the character Lucky on the animated series King of the Hill. Side note: King of the Hill was also a song that he wrote for. I'm not sure he wrote it. I believe he did write it. He wrote King of the Hill for Roger McGuinn, and he sang backing vocals on it, on a Roger McGuinn from the Byrds, and on a solo album that he did. And if you listen to that song, it can get a little difficult to separate, okay, which one's Tom and which one's Roger, because their voices blend really well and they harmonize really well. But so he was on the show, King of the Hill, as the character of Lucky, and he released several more albums. They're strong, almost all of his albums. It's like one or two, maybe little slightly weaker ones, but I think almost all of Tom Petty's albums are consistently very strong, and which continued up until 2017, which is when he passed, which is rather sudden and very unexpected and sad. But he had a great body of work to his name at that point. So we're going to go now into my story with regards to Mr. Petty's work. And he's one of those artists. Let me tell you about this. I guess I first came around 1979. And it was through the show The Gong Show. If you don't know about the Gong Show, ask your parents, or maybe your grandparents at this point, but there was a show called The Gong Show in the late 70s. It was like kind of weird little talent show / game show, hosted by a guy named Chuck Barris. And saying, some people might look like, you were watching the Gong Show? I was 9. I was a kid. Come on. I was like, whatever. But I just always remembered they would have these little things, like the sponsors making things, and saying, oh yes, and also sponsored by, it might have been MCA Records or whoever it was, with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers with their new album, Damn the Torpedoes. So I kept remember seeing this album cover with this classic album. I didn't dig up the album cover, but they'll probably be the thumbnail for the video. But it's a classic looking shot, and he looks just amazing. There's this great sort of cocky grin on his face. And I'll tell you this, then later I might have been Refugee or Don't Do Me Like That or whatever, one of the singles off Eventually I Did Hear Us. And I wasn't impressed. I don't know why. Like I say, it's one of these artists that I was later a great fan of, but just, for whatever reason, for a while, and didn't really get into. What can I say? As a kid, and my taste buds were that musically evolved, and I was a dumb kid. And then later I was a dumb teenager, and then later I was a dumb adult, because, I kind of just kept staying away from Tom Petty. All that great music that came out. And I was like, no, not for me. I don't know. Whatever. Taste is an evolving thing. And that's how it did with me. In spite of all this great music, I just, I gave it the cold shoulder. But I like to say when I get into a particular artist, I get into it when it's time for me to do so. When I'm at that point where it's, not before. There've been artists who was like, I tried to get into them, didn't, and then later did it. It would have to be the right time. And I guess it just needed to be whatever it was, the right time for me and Tom Petty. And I'm not really sure what it was. What exactly was it that turned it over? But at some point in my mid-20s, it would be the mid-1990s, I just thought, probably late 20s, I said, something was drawing me into it. And me being me, I got a boxed set. This one here. Playback, which is 6-disc set. It's 3 discs of classic Tom Petty hits and album cuts, and 3 discs of unreleased stuff and rarities. I would do that back then, and I frankly sometimes do it still now. I was like, I wonder if I'm going to enjoy this artist. I'm going to buy a boxed set, possibly their entire works. And you know what? It almost always works. Quite frequently. I was reckless back then, and I'm slightly reckless now. But usually if I invest that much, obviously some money, but also of my time and my of an artist, I'll generally be finding something pretty good. And I did that with Tom Petty. It was just, I would say, and then I went out and bought his entire works right after that. It's like, actually I didn't. I was a little by little, more and more. Over the years, it just kind of built up. And I would get, just, new album here, old album there, and start getting into it more and more. And my fandom just kind of, grew and grew from there. There's just some awesome songs on this set that just captivated me. I mean, obviously there's the hits, but some ones that, maybe are more album cuts or maybe even singles, but weren't as big. Let's see, Straight Into Darkness is an incredible song that really hit hard. Listen to Her Heart, which I actually caught my attention when I saw it was a bootleg video of a Wilco show, and they covered that. I thought, wow, that's a cool song. Don't I know? Oh my God, yeah, it's Tom Petty. And I got on the original. It was a really good. Woman in Love is another cool song. Change of Heart, which is a huge favorite. It's kind of a bit of a breakup song for me. If I go through a breakup and I'm feeling that kind of way, I'll put that song on, and there he goes. And another thing, and I mentioned this earlier, and I just scratched my face again. documentary. I love me some music documentaries, and back when I was married, I watched this one. I still watch this frequently, but I would watch this one. My then wife would kind of ride along shotgun. It's a great one. It's called Running Down a Dream, and the great Peter Bogdanovich directed it. He directed Last Picture Show and a lot of other fine films, and and it's fairly long. I believe it's over 3 hours, but it's worth it. It's a lot of very great entertaining. There's a lot of kind of humor, and it's got a lot of kind of quiet moments in it. And I just realized, wow, Tom Petty's life was really seemed to be very heavily documented. There were things they talk about the early years, saying, oh yeah, so we then picked up our band and we formed a convoy and we're going to head out to Los Angeles, and there's shots of all the cars and the vehicles heading out to like film footage of it, like Super 8. And it was like, oh, but then we were touring Europe, and then we got pulled in by customs, and they started looking through our stuff, and there's like the band sitting in customs in Europe, kind of looking kind of bored and annoyed. It's like, wow, it's like they have a cameraman following them for their entire lives. One of my favorite little moments on this is kind of funny one. Is like Ben Montanch, the keyboard player, seems to know all the right thing, but he was just talking about the name, and one of my favorite lines where he says, also there's that kind of funny irony to the name, because come on, the Heartbreakers? I mean, who are we kidding? And I thought that was kind of good. It was like kind of taking a little, showing some a little bit of self-deprecation to the bands. And I guess the next point here is my own story, which is the time I got to see Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers live, which is a little bit of a story. The one time I got to see them live, because it was a little bit of a running joke that we were with the big local music festival. It's like, who's playing this year? Oh, is it going to be Tom Petty? And I always try to, because somebody said, oh yeah, maybe Tom Petty. It's like, do you know anything? It's like, no, I just hope it's going to be Tom Petty. It's like, damn it. So anytime a discussion came up online and various, music discussion forum, I was like, what do you think he's going to play? I was like, maybe it'll be Tom Petty. I would always try to be the first person going to say it. And it kept not happening. And then came the one summer, which I thought would be the last one of those festivals I got, and Tom Petty did not play there. I thought it was going to be the last, because what the plan was in my life was that my then wife wanted us to move to Toronto so she could be closer to her family. So this was to be the last festival, because that would be my big musical indulgence. I didn't really have time or the resources to go to many arena shows, but I went to the festival that year. That'd be the last time I would go to that particular festival, because by the end of the year or early the next year, I would have been moving to Toronto. Well, what happened was, instead of the two of us moving to Toronto, she moved to Toronto, and that was the end of the marriage, and I stayed here in Ottawa. As I mentioned, I talked about the documentary. She and I watched it together a bunch of times. I would watch it and she would ride shotgun, but we had little inside jokes about it, like his use of the phrase, but there's no girls in the Heartbreakers. If you see the documentary, it's a funny little moment in there, but it's like kind of one of these little lines that sort of stuck in our conscience. But yeah, and the marriage ended, and so I was there on my own. And the very next year, which was 2017, because my now ex-wife moved out, I think it was end of February 2017, but the marriage was pretty much over by the end of 2016. But then, and at the local music festival in 2017, that summer, who was going to be one of the big headliners, who was closing it out, wound up being Tom Petty. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. So I would have missed that show had I moved, had I not gotten divorced. So it's kind of funny how life works out that way. But I got to see Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. It was an incredible show. Go figure. He's always a reputation as a even the Heartbreakers putting on an excellent live show. It certainly didn't let me down. Lots of classics, a few little odd cuts. A couple of nights before, there's a story. There was a show from the band live, which wound up not happening because of the thunderstorm that dropped down early on in the show, cut it off and it ended earlier. I found actually strange. I wouldn't figure this for the band live. At least the people around me, the fans were kind of obnoxious, and I was like, they're kind of drunk, and I didn't quite like the vibe there, and I was kind of glad to get out. Completely different vibe. I know some people were maybe had a few drinks and were enjoying themselves. Much more positive vibe for Tom Petty, and one of the things that I remember most is him starting up the opening chords of Free Falling, and the guy in front of me, who possibly had a nip or two, and was to borrow a line from Henry Rollins, big Spuds MacKenzie type guy. Don't get that reference. Again, ask your parents or your grandparents. But this kind of big, burly, kind of football player type dude. He's like, oh, God, and he kind of falls back into me. It's a really dense crowd. And he just kind of falls back into me. And he turns around, he's like, wraps his arms around me. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just love this song so much. And I'm like, yeah, I love it too. Yes, bro, we're cool. And it was a much more benign vibe, I'll just say. It was a wonderful show. And sadly, it wound up being the last chance I would get to see him live, because he did pass away a few months later. And that was a gut punch. I'd grown to love him, love his work. It had gone to mean so much to me, and I was, now I was on my own, living first time, and I get hit with this blow. I know I never met the man, but his work meant a lot to me, and it was empathy for him, for all of his, my fellow fans, for his family. It was a real loss. I know, 66, it's not that old. Not really, not these days. Could have gotten a lot of other albums out, but they were not to be. And that was very sad. So that's sort of entire song of life. Yeah, I'll say since then, that actually hasn't been the end of the Tom Petty music, new-ish music. There's actually been a fairly decent archival campaign of archival releases of material recorded either live or in the studio before, throughout his career that hadn't been released before, and it's consistently been fairly interesting. I believe it's Adria, his daughter, one of his daughters, has been overseeing this campaign. At least she's been showing up in the liner notes. Obviously, it's not like quite mentioned before, Grateful Dead, King Crimson, Frank Zappa levels of all these live releases. I wouldn't have really figured Tom Petty as being kind of, I'm thinking kind of like Neil Young or Bob Dylan, with these kind of like these hidden gems, Prince as well, these hidden gems swirled away, and now finally they're being released. But actually, there's been some box sets, some live stuff, and some reissue campaigns of some albums. This particular one here, which I was showing you before, I was just listening to this just today, last disc of it at American Treasure. And there's been a few other ones. I believe it's the Fillmore set, multi-disc set of live stuff that he's done. There was a 4-disc reissue of Wildflowers, or maybe all the other things that we can look forward to. So maybe the vaults aren't quite empty, and it's consistently interesting stuff. There's a song called Just Cropped Up. It's Two Men Talking, and I listened and said, wow, this is a great song. And he never put it out when he was still alive. Maybe he would have eventually done so. But yeah, so I guess, and if not, if there's nothing more, then he left us with a very a great legacy of music. Covered a lot of different styles, some rock and roll, pop, some more folk stuff, some more country stuff. He did a blues album called Mojo. He had an absolutely killer band, like any version of the Heartbreakers. Just always great musicianship in it. They had two drummers, Stan Lynch and Steve Ferroni, and two bass players, Ron Blair and the late Howie Epstein, who are all amazing. I've mentioned Ben Montench, who also was part of the songwriting team. Also, great keyboard player, arrange, and Mike Campbell. Absolutely one of my favorite guitar players. Reminds me of a little bit of Steve Cropper. He could do like economical solos. He could stretch it out, but he could like get a great solo. It would be long, but it would exactly hit the mark. Mike Campbell, underrated guitar player, one of the greats. So yeah, I don't want to go on exclusively about Tom Petty when the Heartbreakers were incredible, but yeah, such a great band. Like I say, the man was a legend. I hope I've done him what justice I can in this video. I think kind of wrapping things up. So hopefully it won't be quite as long until the next video when we get to Q. But thanks for coming along. Thanks for coming on this journey for me. Thanks, bye.